thanks for watching Numbskull News. And today we're going to take another look into the Big 12 and where they stack up in the CFP. How many teams can they get in? Can they get 4 teams in? No. We know we're getting 1. All right, we're going to get the Big 12 champ in. But I wanted to start with where our standings are right now. BYU, Iowa State, Kansas State. Chances are one of those teams is going to be our representative in the Big 12. But can we get 2? Can we get 3? Now, 3 seems ridiculous. It does. However, there's an outside shot. If Colorado runs the table, they're 10-2. There's going to be a lot of 10-2 teams out there. SEC, Big Ten, ACC teams that are 10-2. And I think Colorado would get a strong look because of those ratings. Everyone wants Coach Prime in the playoff. So there's an outside, like 1% chance that could happen. Us having 2 undefeated teams, 1 one-loss team, and Colorado that can conceivably go 10-2, that gives us a shot at more than 1 team into the playoffs. But we got to look at our direct competition first. That would be the ACC. Now, Clemson, they got 1 loss, and they have 5 games left to go. And this isn't the easiest schedule on earth. Their next game is Louisville, who's 5-3. Then they got Virginia Tech, who, not having a bad year. They're 5-3 as well. Then they got Pitt, who's undefeated. Citadel. That's a win. And then they got their rivalry game with South Carolina, who's above 500 for what it's worth. They're 4-3 right now. So, how does this look for Clemson? Can they drop another game or 2? Anything is possible at this point. Like I said, 5 games is a lot right now. They're on the heavy side of what they have left. But there's no assurances that Clemson will make it through. They're not the dominant Clemson that we're used to seeing. They're good. They're really good. But I don't know if I don't know if they strike fear into anybody right now. And then you got Miami, who's 8-0. And they definitely have the easiest path. I don't see them not at least getting into the conference game and probably into the playoff regardless whether they lose the conference title game or not for the ACC. Their next game is Duke, who's 6-2, having a good year. But, SMU just beat them. So Miami should be able to handle enough. After that, they got Georgia Tech, who's 5-4. They got Wake Forest, who's 4-4. And they got Syracuse, who's 5-2. So a doable schedule for Miami. Can they get down to 10-2? Can they lose 2 of those games? They probably won't. Just put it out there. SMU, they're 7-1. They got 4 games left. Their next game is Pitt. That's their toughest game yet. So, can they knock off Pitt? And by the way, Pitt is 7-0. So, a loss is coming to Pitt or to SMU. Either they get their second loss or Pitt gets their first one. Now, SMU, it's Boston College, Virginia, and Cal to end the season for them after Pitt. All those are 4-4 teams. All those should be winnable for SMU. Pitt, they got Virginia, they got Clemson, Louisville, who's 5-3, and Boston College, who's 4-4. A little tougher road to hoe. They got 5 games left. And starting with SMU. So, it's not like that game is going to knock one. But here's the thing. If SMU loses to Pitt and they're 10-2, they're out. You could basically call them out. All right. Not unless Clemson falls directly on its face, or I don't see Miami. I don't see Miami losing. I can't see them losing a game the rest of the way. Maybe they screw around and lose one. That's a possibility, but I wouldn't count on it. The ACC is a little bit on shaky ground as far as having 2 teams into the playoff. I was thinking earlier that, hey, it's a clear pick. Now, if Clemson runs the table, which they could, all the way to the title game, and they get in there, let's say it's them in Miami, and Clemson has already one loss, Miami has no losses, they can get both those teams in. But we got a ways to go before that's settled. But all I'm trying to say is nothing, and I mean nothing, is assured for the ACC right now as far as having multiple teams in themselves. Now let's have a little look at the Big Ten. I've said before, I don't see them not having 4 teams. However, this is why I'm going to break this down every week. The Big 12, where they stand with the CFP to the end of the season. Until everything's revealed, that's what we're going to look at. Really, Indiana, they got Michigan State, they got Michigan, Ohio State, and Purdue. They can easily be 11-1 or 10-2. 10-2 doesn't necessarily get you in. I used to think it did for Indiana, but really, it's not the biggest brand. What if Alabama finishes 10-2? Is Indiana going to get in over them? I don't think they are. And you got Oregon, another undefeated team. They got Michigan, Maryland, Wisconsin, Washington left. Very doable for Oregon. They may not drop another game. Penn State, their next game is Ohio State. So this is going to be interesting between Penn State and Ohio State. It's kind of the same thing I was talking about before. One of them is getting a loss. So that helps the Big 12. But Penn State, the remainder of their schedule is Washington, Purdue, Minnesota, who's sneaky good this year. They're 5-3. They're beating teams that people didn't think they would beat. And Maryland. So after Ohio State, Minnesota is the only real threat to Penn State after that. Ohio State, though. Ohio State has a tough road. They're 6-1, 5 games left. And the next game, like I said, Penn State. Purdue's a win, Northwestern's a win. Then they have Indiana. Then they have the big end of the game year, or end of the season year, with Michigan. And I know Michigan isn't Michigan of old. All right, they're 5-3 right now. They're still a good team. They're still a dangerous team. And they will get up for Ohio State. Everyone knows that. It's a huge, huge game. So nothing is settled for Ohio State. Michigan could definitely play spoiler there. So, really, we have to keep an eye on Ohio State. They got a pretty rough schedule. Like I said, they got 2 instant wins. They got 2 easy wins. But Penn State, Indiana, and Michigan, those aren't. Those are 3 rough-ass games to finish the season on. So we got to keep an eye out for Ohio State. If they fall and stumble, if they lose 1 or 2 of those games, I mean, 1, they're probably still in. Who knows, right? We've got to see how everything else stacks up. But if they lose 2, and I don't know if they will. I'm not calling it. I'm not saying they will lose 2 games. But if they do lose 2 games, they will be out of the playoffs, which would be insane. But I'm not calling it. I'm just saying anything can happen right now. The SEC is still very, very interesting. LSU just lost to A&M. Basically, LSU's out. I don't see them. Unless a miracle happens, you never know. I don't want to, Alabama, those are the 2, Missouri's got 6-2. Ole Miss is 6-2. But I don't feel great about all those teams going forward. So really the top 4 here, A&M, Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, they're the ones really to watch. So, like I said, A&M got a great win against LSU. They passed one of the tests they needed to pass. After that, they got South Carolina at 4-3. New Mexico State, God. The SEC needs to start playing 9 freaking conference games. They got Auburn, who's 3-5. They'll beat the hell out of them. But then they got Texas. And here's the interesting thing about the top 4 of the SEC. Texas A&M plays Texas, and Georgia plays Tennessee. So two of the 4 of these teams are going to have at least 2 losses. That's where things open up for the Big 12 with the SEC. Because there's a really good shot they only get 3 teams in. I don't know about 4. 4 may be asking a little bit much in 2024. A&M's got an easy schedule till they get to Texas. That very well may determine which one of those two teams gets into the SEC conference game. And then Georgia and Tennessee, that could decide some things as well. Georgia's remaining schedule. It's not just that easy for these two, though. Because Texas, let's talk about, since we talked about Texas A&M and Texas, let me give you Texas' remaining schedule. They got Florida, 4-3 coming up. They got Arkansas, who's sneaky good. They're 5-3, but Texas should be able to handle them. Kentucky, they'll kill them. And then that A&M game. So they got one kind of a tough game there with Arkansas. That's really the only worry game they got. For you Florida fans, if you want to consider it, fine. I think Texas are going to roll you guys. But now let's get to Georgia and Tennessee. That's the other matchup here where one of these two teams is going to get another loss. But is there another loss on top of that? Can one of these teams end up, 9-3? Because they're not getting in the playoffs at 9-3. I don't care. Georgia's not going to get into the playoffs at 9-3. I doubt it. Tennessee definitely won't. But Georgia, they got Florida. Don't have to worry about that. But they got Ole Miss. Ole Miss is 6-2. Pretty damn good team. Georgia will be favored. But that's not, that's still a team they got to worry about. And then, of course, Tennessee, and then UMass. My God. And then Georgia Tech, who's, whatever. They'll beat Georgia Tech. I'm not all that worried about Georgia versus Georgia Tech. But there's that Ole Miss game they got to worry about. They got to get through them. And then Tennessee, they got Kentucky, Mississippi State. They're going to destroy them. UTEP at the end of the year with Vanderbilt, who is 5-3. That's before that would be a joke, but it's not a joke this year. If Tennessee's thinking, we'll just go in there and roll Vanderbilt and, get into a conference title game. If they get through Georgia, then, that, and if they get beat by if Tennessee gets beat by Georgia, it may line up pretty well for them to get beat by Vanderbilt. It's hard to have a trap game at the last game of the season, but it is what it is. So at the very best the SEC can hope for is to have two one-loss teams, and both of them go into the conference title game. You're going to have several 10-2 SEC teams at the end of the season. Now, how many of those make the playoffs and how many don't? I don't know, because they're going to be competing with, maybe a couple 10-2 Big Ten teams, 10-2 Big 12 teams, and ACC teams. But this right here, this opens the door for the Big 12 to get more than one team in. So as you see, before we get to Halloween, some teams and some conferences need to be a little scared. There may be a reason why the SEC and the Big Ten want, automatically 4 teams a year in. Because there's going to be years, like in the SEC this year, they may only end up with 3. And really with the Big Ten, if Ohio State trips up a little bit more, and they got the schedule that could trip them. They really do. With Penn State, Indiana, and Michigan left on their schedule, they can go undefeated the rest of the way, or they could drop 1 or 2 more. Now, a 10-2 Ohio State, they're getting in the playoff. No doubt about it. Regardless if they're playing for the Big Ten title or not, they'll get it. They'll get an at-large at 10-2. But would they trip up 2 more times? I don't know, but the schedule sets up for them to trip. So we're going to keep an eye on Ohio State and see how that works out. Starting with Penn State coming up. And I know they always beat Penn State. Even if Penn State is having a badass year, they always seem to beat Penn State. But it is football. Any given Sunday, any given year, anything can happen. But right now, as it looks, the Big 12, they're still looking good. They're still looking good to get more than one team in. I made a case for 3. We need more information. We'll see what it looks like next week. Is Colorado still are they still on track for 10-2, Or do they get another loss? We'll find out. Anyway, thanks for watching this crap, and I'll be back with some more crap later. Bye.